Ladies and gentlemen, I am here live with Ryan Williams, co-founder of DivvyShares. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited.
So today we're going to start with the how we start every episode, just a background on who you are, what you've done. You kind of have an interesting career arc where you've been in the real estate game, you've been in the construction game, and now you're kind of going as the on the investor side of things. Walk us through that career and how you ended up starting DivvyShares.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it. I guess going way back, I've been in construction and general contracting for 20 plus years since very early 2000s, late 90s. And So started out that way, and then that kind of got me into doing some real estate. So we did some real estate investing, not at a huge scale. I had, several rentals. We did some flips and things like that. And so through the course of that, I met my partner, John. He was also in real estate. And we were kind of voicing our frustrations with real estate and kind of the fluctuations in the market and kind of lack of control and lack of cash flow and things like that. And that's kind of started the discussions that got us into buying businesses. And so that kicked off DivvyShares. And
Okay,
that's in about 2024, beginning of 24 was when we officially started.
and how much of, you've seen so much content online. It's been a kind of a big focus of the conversations on this podcast about buying trades businesses, home services businesses. How much of that online trend and the content that's out there kind of informed your decision making here?
It definitely started the conversation. Folks like Walker Deibel and Cody Sanchez. We actually saw Cody Sanchez speak summer of 24, which really just kind of reinforced what we already knew and were already doing. So that definitely started some of the conversations and helped kind of guide some of those early conversations for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so walk me through. You guys get together. You say, okay, we're going to start doing this. What were the first steps that you actually took? Maybe you can talk about the financing side of it. Were you working on figuring that side out first? And then ultimately, how did you end up with this unique model of Divvy shares? And if you could kind of explain what is that unique model to the audience as well, that'd be good.
Yeah, for sure. So I was already a little bit familiar with, and when I say a little bit, I mean a very little bit. I had a couple of friends that worked for different trades companies, HVAC and electrical primarily, uh, that had those businesses had been kind of bought by PE. So the good part of that is I knew, okay, this is a thing. Like people are buying businesses, right? Buying trades businesses. On the flip side, I saw the aftermath of that. I saw the aftermath of kind of what happened to those companies when they were bought by PE. Through my friends, I was able to kind of hear their stories about, just how change was handled, kind of the disregard for the employees or the culture that existed before anything like that. And so uh, that's really what kind of fueled our model, which, on the acquisition side, we buy businesses just like everybody else is buying businesses right now. Our difference is on the back end. Our goal is to sell them back to the employees, either through an ESOP or an employee-owned trust. And so that's where the difference comes in. And the reason we chose that was because we wanted to do, basically what PE was doing, but just do it a lot differently. We wanted to, work with the people that were there, reward the employees that A, help the seller get to a point where he could sell and have something worth selling, and then B, reward the employees for sticking around, helping us build it and bring it up to something that's, exponentially bigger than what the seller sold us. And so we wanted to try and create as many, quote unquote winners as possible. We wanted to put the employees in a position where they could win and they could benefit from all their hard work. For decades and decades, maybe centuries, wealth has been built on the backs of the middle class. And we just wanted to try and find a way to keep that wealth in their pockets as much as possible. And so we do that through selling the business back to the employees.
So walk me through the tactical bits of that. What does that actually look like? How does kind of the typical deal get structured for you all?
Yeah, and I have to preface by saying we're figuring this out a little bit on the fly. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
there is no playbook for this. Um, there's a couple companies that have done it to varying success, and we're just trying to kind of add to that ecosystem. And we haven't exited any yet, so we're still building. But we're doing it through regional platforms, and so we want to have kind of a centralized hub company that houses some central operations that then kind of rolls up and acquires companies underneath that platform. And then our goal is really to sell that platform back to the employees that either are employed by the platform or are employed by the companies within that platform's portfolio. So um, that's kind of how it works. The exit is no different than any other buyer buying it, with the exception that we control how that exit happens. We control the timing of it. We control, is it a full exit? Is it a partial exit? Because maybe the business isn't 100% ready at that time. Or maybe we have investors that are more interested in a long-term hold than they are a short-term gain. So um, we can design the exit to fit whatever state the company's in, whatever situation our investors are looking for, and everything like that. So we control a lot of that. So that's kind of the basic overview of the model.
Yeah. Walk me through the first, I mean, how many acquisitions have you done so far? What have those acquisitions been? And we'll just kind of start with the first one, and then I will dive a little deeper into each one specifically.
Yeah, so we bought, like I said, we started in 24. We started our search. We closed two companies last year. We bought a plumbing company and a water filtration company. Plumbing companies in Asheville, North Carolina, water filtrations in Raleigh, North Carolina. Of those two, plumbing company is definitely the biggest one. Water filtration was essentially nothing. It was a cash deal. And we've since kind of turned that into a distributor slash manufacturer as opposed to
Mm.
having a retail side, and built our own brand of water filtration. So we're selling that through the plumbing company. Um, and so, the plumbing company that we bought wasn't huge. I mean, we did last year we did uh, almost 5 million in revenue. So I think we were at like 4.6 or 4.7. And so that company is definitely still growing. It's a strictly residential service plumbing company. They do very little commercial. They do zero new construction or anything like that. So it's in a pretty small market in Asheville. So for what it is, doing almost 5 million in revenue and a pretty limited scope of work is pretty good.
That's fantastic. What was the timeline like on that? And I mean, talk to me a little bit about, because that was the first acquisition you've ever
Yep.
done, right? So, walk me through the timeline, and then also maybe some of the learnings that you didn't know coming into. I'm sure there was a multitude of learnings, but what are some of the
Yeah.
things that kind of surprised you about that process?
Oh, good grief. How long is this podcast supposed to be? I mean, there's reasons there's books that are written on the acquisition, just the process. I mean, there's a lot to it. Um, but being kind of in it and feeling some of that, those processes pan out and feeling, the emotion of some of that stuff that happens is a whole different thing. So timeline wise, like I said, we started looking for businesses. Well, we started kind of forming DivvyShares and the idea in like January, February 24.
Hmm.
We actually sent an LOI on the company that we ended up buying. I believe it was in April. So only not too long after we started searching. But the asking price was considerably higher. Um, you know, we kind of got a little bit into diligence and realized that there was some stuff going on that wasn't in the sim. There was
Hmm.
some stuff once we kind of got really deep into the financials, we found some stuff and we knew we were going to be adjusting the price. Uh, we kind of started the retrade conversations and then we ended up falling out of LOI. Um, and so as far as timeline goes, uh, we ended up going back under LOI, I think two additional times on that company. The whole time we're analyzing other businesses and throwing out other offers, getting in other LOIs and dropping out of those because of stuff or whatever. And so we got under final draft of LOI in January, maybe it was December of 24, going into January 25. Then we ended up closing in May.
That's awesome. And then
Yeah.
the surprising components of that. What looking back on that, what was, what's the biggest learning, I guess, that you took to that second acquisition?
So the biggest learning was, well, the biggest thing that we learned through the course of that is probably a whatever operating capital you think you need after closing, double it.
Mm,
Um, and then second learning was if you in an asset purchase, your access to credit after close is severely limited, which was something that we weren't prepared for. We kind of figured that we were buying a business that had been in business for 25 or 30 years, and we would just be able to use those financials. And uh, at least at the very start, nobody let us use those. They all
hmm
wanted to see 12 months under our entity, and yeah, much more limited access to capital post close than we thought we would have.
And is there anything you can do to kind of get around that, or is that just the nature of the beast? And now you have that learning and you can adjust the underwriting on the next deal. Like, what do you do with that information?
So there's two things. So if we're doing an asset purchase in the future, we're gonna need a lot more operating capital. So that's one. And then two is we've since worked with our attorney on more on stock purchases.
Hmm
And so if the company's in good standing in the future, we'll probably lean more towards a stock purchase if possible, and then just put uh, precautions in there to carry over for lawsuits and credit and tax burden and things like that that may pop up afterwards. So that's one thing that we've worked a lot with our attorney on is kind of leaning more into a stock purchase as opposed to asset. Because with the stock, you do inherit the existing company and all that access to
Right.
credit still
Can you
there.
explain the difference there?
Yeah, so a stock purchase, you're basically buying your way into the existing company. So with a stock purchase, the sellers and the entity that the seller has set up, you're basically assuming ownership into that. Whereas with an asset purchase, he's shutting down his entity, you're starting a new one up. So all of your supplier accounts and everything have to start from scratch. So you have zero history at that point with all of your vendors. They look at you as a brand new entity, so they may give you good pricing, they may give you really crappy pricing until they know that you pay and know how much business you're going to do. So with a stock purchase, you're basically just walking into the company, as a 90% stock owner and you know, keeping all that stuff as it sits. The
That's
bad part is with a stock purchase, if there's something hidden, like a lawsuit that maybe is coming up that's, for past work that hasn't been filed yet. I mean, you're right in the thick of that because you're part of that entity. If there's, if they screwed up taxes 3 years ago and you get audited and you end up having to owe 200K in taxes, you're on the hook for that. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you have to protect yourself from. So it's a give or take. So if it's in our mind, if it's a solid acquisition and we've gone back and done all our due diligence and everything came back squeaky clean, we might lean more towards a stock purchase. If it's a little bit riskier, or maybe slightly distressed, or we can tell that there's a lot of bad debt or anything like that, that's a sign that we probably need to go into it as an asset purchase and then just plan on a higher level operating capital to kind of unlock getting vehicles and doing that kind of stuff where we don't have to um, apply for so much credit afterwards. There's a lot of like if you read a lot of the books, they'll steer you away from the stock purchase just because of the risk. Um, but in like big M&A, they're all stock purchases. They're not asset
right.
purchases. And so on the lower end, I think a lot of the hesitation is because like you're not getting a template uh, uh, purchase agreement for a stock purchase for a company this size. In a stock purchase, you have to have it drawn up. So, um, and there's expense with that, pretty sizable expense. So,
Awesome. Okay, well, let's dive into the specifics of the actual sort of as a trades business owner. You've now been spending 2 years looking and underwriting deals. What are the things that you are looking for to say, okay, this is a deal we're willing to move on? What are some of the red flags? And if you could kind of position it as advice to a business owner who is starting to think about selling, what are the things that they need to have dialed in?
so licensing is a big thing that needs to be durable. That's probably the single biggest if you're getting into a business that requires state licensing. The other thing is staffing. If the what we found is that usually on a couple of initial calls, if the owner is saying, "Yeah, I'm about 50% in the business and 50% out," or I do this, a little bit of this or a little bit of that, there's a good chance they do all of this or all of that, and they're in it about 2 or 3 times as much as they say they are. And not that or I should say that somebody coming in to replace them is going to be in it 2 or 3 times as much as the owner is. Maybe that's a better way to say it. If they're doing, let's say, the estimating, and they're like, oh, I spend, maybe 15 hours a week estimating, chances are to replace that, at least in the initial, it's going to be a full-time job. You need a full-time estimator to come in and take over what that owner is doing in about 15 hours. Um, and so, if I had to narrow it down to two kind of things that really are the biggest red flags, that's licensing and levels of staffing, levels of management.
When you look at a business, there's all the stuff with AI, automation, and as somebody who's acquiring companies, you look at a business that doesn't have any of that in place. Maybe they're all on paper. How much of that is an opportunity versus a red flag for you? And do you when you see a business that is super doing really well on SEO, they've got AI implemented in certain areas, is that a positive, or do you see that as actually we would rather fill that gap and increase the value of the company? How do you look at all this different technology that's in place and how that impacts the valuation?
So there's a couple different ways to look at it. So you can look at it from the what's the operational load of implementing that stuff, right? Which is basically, what's it going to take staffing wise to get that off the ground? I tend to look at it more like what's the culture load of implementing that. And so if I'm looking at a business that, the tenure, a lot of times you'll look at an employee list and you'll see, man, this guy's everybody's been there more than 15 years, 20 years. That's got to be great, right? But if they're not on a CRM and they don't have any kind of tracking systems and they're not doing KPIs, uh, you're going to have very high turnover the second that you start implementing that stuff. And so there's a culture load to implementing technology, especially in service industries. If we're just talking about, construction and service industries, a lot of those guys don't want to have to like look at their phone to see where their next job is. They want to have printouts of everything they're supposed to do today. And so the second that you implement that stuff, the guys are going to get frustrated, even if they're going to end up going to another company that's going to do exactly the same thing. They just don't want to do it under the same roof.
Mhm.
Um, and so I look at it as a negative if they don't have technology, not so much an opportunity. Now, if let's say that it's just an operational thing, maybe all the stuff facing the technicians and all that stuff is fine. Maybe they have some kind of project management tool that guys are using, but maybe that just doesn't roll into the operation side, that it's not tied to marketing, it's not tied to bookkeeping and stuff like that. That's a little bit different because that's just, there's an operational load to implement, but once it's up and running, it's not going to affect the guys at all. It's not going to affect production. It's not going to affect anything else. You might have a uh, higher quality leads coming in, and you'll be able to handle bookkeeping a lot faster. There's not much load to that to implement. And so that would be an opportunity. But anything facing the technicians, or I refer them as revenue drivers. So this is like technicians, sales. the guys that are actually driving revenue. You don't want to have to make any gigantic changes to those guys unless you have plenty of time to implement, and you already have go into it knowing that you're going to have to be hiring from day one.
So it sounds like the summary is if it's a back office thing that you don't have to create any behavioral change, that's a positive. Whereas if you are going in working with somebody who's been doing it one way for 30 years, that's the resistance you want to try to avoid as the purchaser of a business. And then if you flip that around as a trades business owner who's looking to sell, making sure your team is open to that technological growth, that's the one thing you want to make sure you have in place.
Yeah, for sure.
Got it. Very cool. And what have you guys seen or implemented in terms of technology? Have you experimented with any new things going with that first acquisition? Is there anything you guys implemented there?
Yeah, we've implemented a bunch. So they were already on Service Titan and very deep into Service Titan. So we had no issues with the guys already knew kind of their numbers and things like efficiency, and they were used to hearing dollars per day and hours of production and stuff like that. So on that side, we were pretty good. The things that we implemented, so we put cameras in the trucks that are AI driven, and so those monitor behaviors, both of our technicians, our drivers, but also uh, like of other drivers that are affecting our guys. And so, kind of monitors inside the truck and outside the truck, which it's an amazing system. And then we've also we use AI for automated text messaging and things like that. Speed to lead, so anything that comes in through aggregators or anything like that, we use it for speed to lead. We tried to use AI CSR, which did not go well.
Mm.
Um, and so that ended up costing us uh, several hundred grand, to be honest, over the course of a couple months in lost revenue. And it ended up being, uh, I mean, we could dive into that a
Yeah,
little bit
please
if you
do.
want,
I'm
if you
I'm
think it'd be
very
useful.
very interested in that.
Yeah, so we tried the AI CSR thing. First thing we noticed is that there was a lag, like it just wasn't responsive, and we went back and forth with the vendor. And what it ended up being was we had to rewire our office because the wiring in the office was so old. We had to get a new routers, all new routers, a modem, and server, like all of that stuff had to get replaced. Um, which that cut our response time, like reaction to like within conversation, it cut it down almost in half by doing all of that. Because there was just the equipment, our phones, everything was outdated, and so it was just injecting a lag into that process. And so that was part of it. So that ended up costing us almost 10 grand just to get all that stuff done. And then, but once we got into it and we started using it, the problem that we had, because this is in Western North Carolina, um, there we had so Asheville is a diverse area. There's natives there. There's people come from up north and they have second and third homes. People from New York or California have second and third homes there. And there's also a very high population of retired folks. And so what you run into is that there's this big variance in accent and conversation pace. And
Mm.
so what would happen is that uh, we would, through the course setting up AI, one of the things that you dial in is pace of conversation. So how long before in a silence in a conversation, how long before the computer says, "Are you still there?" or something like that. So what would happen is we would dial it in for a retiree, right? Which might have half a second or a second longer pause tolerance. Well, then somebody from, New York, who that's their third home, and they're in town for a week that wants to get something fixed, they're not going to have patience for sitting in for a second and a half of silence. Like they want conversations to move. And so but if we dialed it to them, then the older folks would be rushed and they would get frustrated because the computer would go on, are you still there? Well, yeah, I'm
Hmm.
here. I'm trying to like tell you the address or whatever. So that was part of it was conversation pace. The other part of it was it had a lot of issues with accents. And in Western North Carolina, I love North Carolina. Let me just preface by saying that. But there's people here who have very thick accents that are that are sometimes hard to understand. And if your AI system trying to figure out, somebody saying they got a leak pouring out of the ceiling at Mama's house, the AI might not know what the hell is a Mama. Um, and so with that kind of stuff, it was just hard to coach. And we ended up, you know, kind of scrapping it. We still use it for some things, but we don't use it for direct customer interaction. It's not in our call tree at all anymore. We'll probably go back to it at some point, but we're going to let some of the bugs get worked out, and then we'll try it again, at some point. But right now, it's just not worth that. It cost us too much in sales.
And was it all inbound that it was targeted on? So people calling in, the AI agent answers the phone. That was the use case.
Yeah, we started using it on inbound, and it was, kind of at the tail end of our call tree. So it would come in, run through our CSRs and then our office manager, and then, I mean, but it was still getting, 20 calls a day. Um, and so that's where we saw the drop off is, we know what our conversion is for our regular staff, and then you see once it goes to AI, it's, a quarter of what it would be if somebody had answered the phone. And so yeah, it just ended up not being worth the penalty for us.
And when was this? And just the reason I ask is just because the evolution of AI is so insanely fast. And I'm
Yeah,
just
we
curious, when did you try to integrate this?
we shut it down in December. We
Okay,
started it probably August or September is when we started, you know, kind of soft rolling it out, and then but we shut it down in December.
very interesting. Yeah, I'll be curious to see, if you come back to that, when you come back to that, just because, like I said, AI, 6 months ago, even in December, the AI game has completely evolved. And so that is the challenge. One thing you mentioned there that I think is important for anybody who's implementing AI is the fact that you said you knew the conversion rates on the AI
Yeah.
versus the regular SDR. And, you can't just go and implement willy-nilly any AI platform and understand if it works unless you have a benchmark to compare against. So, that gave you the ability to look and say, oh, this isn't working.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with people that have said, "Ah, well, you have no way of knowing how much it actually costs you." It's like, no, I actually do. Like, I can tell you, I can't say I can tell you to the dollar, but I can tell you within probably a 10% margin of error how much it cost us. Um, I've had people say that I had no way of knowing how much it cost. I've also had people say, well, it was, it's got to be worth the operational savings of not having a CSR. I'm like, no, we replaced it and actually saved money. So, um, yeah, there's knowing that metric and knowing, uh, having the data well enough in hand, like, the quality of the data to be able to make that kind of judgment call is key because it would be very easy to get in that and just say, oh, well, it's worth it. I don't have to hire a CSR. I don't have to, the phone's not ringing as much, so it's not bugging the girls and like all that kind of stuff. But when you can actually see, geez, this cost us well into six figures uh, to try this, like it's it's pretty easy to pull the plug when you can see the numbers.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting, as you grow, you see a lot of companies bringing in these sort of chief AI roles or just somebody whose full job is to sit over top of all the different agents that exist at an organization, monitor their performance, figure out which ones are working, why they are or are not working. And so it'll be interesting to see how that sort of role grows as, more and more people are building holding companies and they have multiple different operations. I'll be curious to see how, that role impacts the service industry.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I'm I'm not saying that we'll never go back to it. We probably will
Right.
at some point because it'll, like you said, it's evolving so fast. But also we don't, we don't have the staffing to like in that kind of a role. So let's say we had somebody that was just in charge of, either IT or yeah, even if it was just like an IT manager or something like that, somebody that could be all over it and like, on the phone with that tech support all day if they needed to be to get it dialed in. We just don't, we're not at that level yet. Once we get to a level where we can get a little bit more specialized, plus the services that are out there go through, enough iterations to where they have all those bugs worked out. I'm happy to give it a shot. I mean, I could at least see the potential of it. But yeah, we just weren't there yet.
Absolutely. Speaking of that next level, we'll kind of finish with this question. We're headed into Q2 now. What does the future look like? What is kind of the end goal of this business, and where do you see kind of this year taking you?
Yeah, we're about a year and a half into a 7-year plan, and so we want to get uh, you know under contract on at least 4 more acquisitions this year, um, and with the end goal of having about 10 million in EBITDA by year 7, and being able to start the process of selling this thing back to the employees.
Ryan, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find you? Obviously, you're looking to buy businesses. So, for any of those trades business owners out there, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, divvyshares.com, DIVVY shares.com. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look for the Biz Ops Ninja. You'll see my profile pic with the beard. And yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Reach out, set up a meeting. Happy to talk.
Beautiful. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.